Hi everyone, welcome back to Lipstick Chat with Ebony Fox. This is part 3 of a series of looking back at my past to figure out, just how did I get where I am today? I was in the military at one point, and my first significant love was also in the military. And we hung out a lot, hung out with a bunch of friends. We played a lot of bid whist and sat under the trees in the barracks and played. And then, we thought that we liked each other. We started dating, hanging out, doing a lot of things together. Little did I know back then that he was kind of known as a Casanova type guy. He was about 6'2", chocolate complexion man with bow legs. But I was young and naive when I met him. I was probably 21, 22 years old. Had never had a real relationship in my life and didn't actually know what to look for in a good man to make that determination. After a couple years of dating, though, one day we were hanging out at the barracks and he asked me to marry him. And just like my previous relationship, you think you're special because somebody picked you. Not realizing at that time that I should have been picking them. And not realizing what a good man was because I didn't have the father figure who would educate me on things like that. But needless to say, we moved forward, planning a wedding and got married. And I want to tell you, the reception was probably the biggest reception I've ever seen in my life because I think everybody on the military base was at our reception, people I didn't even know. But I will tell you that I noticed at the reception that there was a particular woman who was intensely interested in my new husband. Now, there are a lot of things that I didn't know about my new husband. Even when I went to his home to meet his family, it was then that I found out after we were married that there was a woman at home who was pregnant with his child. And nope, he never told me. I didn't find that out until I went home to meet his family. That was very tense and very stressful. Um, as time went on, as they do in the military, they moved us to housing on the military base. We went on to have 2 children. And I remember when I was pregnant, my phone would always ring at the house. And when I would answer the phone, whoever was on the phone would hang up. I didn't really think that much of it at that time. I just assumed that somebody had dialed the wrong number. As I said, I was very young, very naive, had never had a serious relationship prior to this man. So all these things happening, I just took them in stride. I remember coming home from shopping one day and there were 2 women standing in my home. And I thought, well, what are they doing here? And who are they? And apparently my husband had met them at a store and had invited them to the house. Now, I still was not really aware because I was still extremely naive. So when I walked in the house, he introduced me. They were looking at me. I was looking at them like, well, hi, but who are you and what are you doing here? They quickly left. There was not a whole lot of conversation after I walked in. And I look back on all of the things that I learned and the things that I went through, and I just wonder how dumb could a person be. But when you're raised in an environment where you're never allowed to date, these things were all new to me. I remember as that relationship was nearing an end, I had the second child, and my husband was getting dressed to go to the NCO club, which was a club on base. And I was asking him, where are you going? And he was telling me that he was going out. And here I am, here at home with the kids, and you're going out to party. And I remember him telling me to stop talking to him. And I just kept talking about, you can't leave me here with these kids. And he hit me in the mouth and knocked me down a couple of flights of stairs. So, I look back on all this stuff as we talk about narcissism and mannerisms and habits that these men have. And one thing all the men in my life had in common was they were all womanizers. They were all, in their minds, God's gift to women. They were all abusive in one way, shape, or form. And I think it's important for young women to know that if a man puts his hand on you once, more than likely he will put his hand on you a second time. So please be aware. Now, this all leads me to the first man in my life, which was my father. Because I always wondered why I picked the men that I picked. My father was in the military too, just so you all know. And he was stationed overseas quite a bit. I think he and my mom were married for 69 years. But they feel that they managed to stay married that long because he was always taking tours overseas. He was in Vietnam twice, Thailand, Greenland, Japan, Alaska. I mean, he was always traveling, and we were not traveling with him. So, as kids, my brothers and I, we didn't really know him because he was typically gone. And I remember, my mom would send him pictures of us. And if I was wearing an outfit, he would tell my mom to let the hem out of that skirt or make sure I looked like a granny when I was in junior high school. My father was controlling everything from overseas. I remember when he decided to come home to be around us, how none of us would talk to him. Because literally, we didn't know who he was. My mom did everything. She was the mother and the father. But my mother was very submissive in an outward type manner. So I say that to say that behind closed doors, my mother was a fighter, just like her mother was a fighter, and just like I'm a fighter. So that apparently runs in our blood. But, things that I would see and things that she would teach me was really about being more submissive. Washing his clothes and making sure he had a meal every day and ironing his uniforms and all the things she did. My father was not the type to even change a light bulb. My mother did all those things. She was always fixing things inside and outside the house, the air conditioner, the heater. She was sort of accountable for everything. And as I look back on my life to determine how did I wind up with these kind of men now, my father was fair complexion. He had grayish blue eyes. He was a black man, but he just was fair. He had an Indian background. Um, I didn't know him that well. And I keep saying that for a reason. So as time went on and we spent time around him, he decided he wanted to move to Athens, Greece, and he wanted to take the family with him. So this would be the first tour that we all went to a new country together. Well, that should have been the most enjoyable tour of my life because Athens, Greece was absolutely stunningly beautiful. But my father was so possessive and so controlling. I couldn't play baseball on a baseball team, a softball team, unless my mother played too. So I was a pitcher and she was a catcher. I couldn't go to the movie theater unless I went with my mom. I couldn't go to any parties. And I went to high school in Athens, Greece, and when there was prom, I couldn't go. When there were, after graduation, friends wanted us to all hang out together. So they talked to my parents, and my father said no. So after graduation, here I am sitting at home in the house alone. There was never any conversation about men and relationships and what you should look for. It was always this thing about, my father said I could live with them until I was in my 50s. He never wanted me to leave, which was very scary. And my mother at that point decided that she needed to help me. She needed to help me get out. And she took me to the military base in Athens, Greece, and had me take the entrance exam for the Air Force, which is how I wound up with the man that I married. She was afraid for me. She knew that I needed to get away from my father because he was always going to be controlling. Life goes on. I made my own way in the military, and as time went on, I would have frequent phone conversations with my mother, how things were going, and I would go home like most kids did to visit my family, and I would hear my mom tell me things that I just couldn't believe. Like my father would tell her that she needed to get out, leave the house, and my mother would say, "I'm not going anywhere." Well, now both their names were on the deed to the home, so I don't know why my father thought she needed to leave, but he would threaten her that he would put her out. And I would tell my mom, I said, well, legally, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. My father would be very frustrated with me because he didn't want me to tell my mom anything about her legal rights as a spouse. And as I said, they've been married for 69 years. Well, one year my mother called me and told me she had an illness, of which at that time I knew that this illness was terminal. I debated whether to even talk about this on this platform, but it will give you some sort of idea of who my father was and who I found out he was. Because apparently, my father wanted my mother to go. He wanted her to, if she was ill, he wanted her to pass on. And she did, but he regretted it. And then he accused me of some things that I didn't do in order for me not to come back to the house to visit him after my mother passed. Come to find out later that my father had all these women that he had been seeing for years on the side. I say there were a minimum of 4 that he wanted to be able to come back and forth to the house to take care of him, that he wanted to see on the side. And so he figured if he could cause drama between me and him, that I wouldn't come visit him. And then he would have this wonderful life with all these women coming in and out of the house. But you know what? God has a sense of humor. He truly has a sense of humor because he put my father through some things that put him off his feet, which took away the ability to be a Romeo Casanova type. It's not that I'm upset about that now. It's all about looking at how I was raised, looking at my life as a child, and all the things that I went through to figure out how I got to where I am today, how I selected the type of men that I selected without education, and looking at my father as the only role model, and my mother being the type of mother from back in the day. She did everything for my father, so I thought I was supposed to do everything for the men in my life who all took advantage of that and took advantage of me. So I say all these things to young women that what passed back in the day, what was okay back in the day, may not be the best thing for you now in your life. What I can tell you for sure right now in my life is I probably look better today than I did 10 years ago. And not because I'm doing anything new, but because I don't have the stress and the anxiety. And I have the time to look after me and to do some things for me. Because in all those years, if you go back and listen to my videos, you will hear how I always took care of the men in my life. But I didn't put myself first. I always put them first. And that's because that was something that my mother did. And I don't think she knew that I looked at her as a role model and that I would mirror her behavior when the time came. But there was no one else to mirror myself after. My mother was the most important thing in my life. And to this day, I still feel that way about her. We can't all be perfect. And what we're supposed to do is learn from our mistakes. So I hope that you all take an opportunity to look at how you were raised, look at the men that you've had in your life, how you selected those men, because it's not always about the narcissist, but it is about recognizing what a narcissist is and what they look like so that you won't fall into the same trap that I did. Thank you for listening to this series. I will continue to have discussions about narcissism as it is an important topic for women and men in this world today. Please like and subscribe.